Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. Another driving video from Guatemala. And in today's video, I wanted to continue on the same thread that I started in last video at the lake about this notion of integration, of psychosomatic integration as the key endeavor when it comes to self-realization. And I want to try to make this as clear as possible and bring in a couple of elements about the process and about neurology or neuroscience into the topic, mainly because I still see a lot of information out there from people who have become self-realized, who seem to find it icky to simply talk about our system as a collection of wet electrics that need to be tied together. It's almost akin to saying that we descend from the apes. Right? To someone who had not heard that concept, and how insulting it is to say that we are simply an evolved mammal. You know, it's almost the same. So I hear a lot of talk about grace. I hear a lot of talk about, you know, the holiness of it all, and I would never argue that is incorrect. I would just say it's rather incomplete, and that is not very informative. It tends to make us draw wrong conclusions and obscure the subject when what we're trying to do is to clarify it. So to me, a word like grace is an obscuring word. It's a placeholder term, a catch-all that doesn't have an explanatory power. You may gather from what I'm saying here that I'm a bit of a what would you call it, one of those sort of agnostic sort of logical types in a Richard Dawkins style. And I did have there was a time in my life when I was separating myself from the Christian beliefs under which I was brought up, in which I took on logic and reason as the ultimate vehicle. I found out that was definitely not the case. I am, as I've said many times here in the channel, a mystic at heart. I would never take away from the subjective experience of the sublime. I was lucky enough to have not only discovered psychedelics, but actually I've been granted what you could call the beatific vision. I've been on my knees weeping at the beauty of high levels of mental coherence. It's unlike anything. It bypasses reason, logic, and anything you could ever put into words. And there's nothing discerningly human or even natural about it, if I could put it in those terms. So this is not a video to take away from any of that. It's simply to say that if we are to inform one another on how to get there, we better use mundane and understandable terms and methods. That's all. Yeah. So when it comes to the terms and methods, we have to acknowledge that if we're not going to speak about causation, if we're not going to say that the nervous system causes those experiences, we at least need to acknowledge that there is correlation, that these very high levels of spiritual vision and experience and realization correlate with very high levels of psychosomatic integration and neural coherence. Okay, and the Taoists and the Chinese and schools of perennial practices and philosophies would agree with me on that. That's one of the reasons that I like them so much. They advocated the notion that enlightenment was a psychosomatic endeavor, nothing more. Yeah, you could not reach it through, quote unquote, being randomly waiting to be touched by grace. And if you're going to say that certain practices invite grace, we may as well dispense with the term and just acknowledge that there are practices that create the right conditions in the nervous system for example, acceptance to start to become easier for you. And again, right, I don't want to dismiss grace completely, because who knows what's at play in this bigger system that we're talking about, right? So when you touch deep non-duality, for example, you come to realize that pretty much everything you've put into words, including things about the nervous system, were all, things were not quite what you thought they were. Let's put it like that. That's to put it mildly, actually. Okay, but so long as that's not the case, so long as you're still in the land of the mortals, or we are still in the land of the mortals, we are better off discussing things in mortal terms that we can bite into and put into practice. So that's a long introduction to say that integration or psychosomatic integration and the practices that lead to it are really what we ought to be focusing on, to counteract what I described in my last video, which is the natural inclination of our nervous system, or the natural way in which it develops, which is a fragmentary way. Yeah. So let's start with that as a matter of clarifying things. So if you read into embryology and human development, human embryological, if that's a word, development, you will come across the notion that the nervous system starts as a single circular bundle that is whole. It's completely unified. Then it kind of stretches itself along the spine, and then the brain is formed, and so on. And so what you see is, from the moment we are an embryo to the moment we're born, and then further down the line, there is a constant growth into what you could call this sort of functional branching out and separation and fragmentation of the nervous system. It is not it's not a push towards integration, it's a push towards disintegration, as a matter of fact. Now, that disintegration, as I just mentioned, is a functional disintegration. You can't have a singular nervous system with a body as complex as a human body and expect yourself to survive very long. So we need to, our nervous system needs to fracture or fragment itself into functional parts in order for each thing to do its job. After we're born, this fragmentation continues, and what is a physical, electrical fragmentation starts to also engender a psychic fragmentation. Yeah. So I've spoken many times again about self and other being the first big rift, and then from there on, what the Chinese would call the 10,000 things arise. Yeah. Or in Buddhism, I think it's also called that way. So that refers to the infinite number of shapes and forms that we perceive as the world. So all those things speak of a fragmentary movement of creation, if you will. In this case, the creation of a human being. It is interesting because this branching out is in certain philosophies what's referred to as the tree of life. And normally when we hear about the tree of life, we think it's this beautiful thing, and it's amazing, and the variety and the luscious exuberance of life and the rest of it. But in many yogic texts, the tree of life is known to give bitter fruit, because in yoga it is understood that this fragmentation, all this branching out of the nervous system, creates an enormous amount of pain the moment it has already established itself as a functional mechanism, if we talk in mechanical terms about it. So so this is where the work is laid out for us. It's in the unavoidable and undeniable fact that our nervous system has branched out functionally and become utterly fragmented, meaning that our perception is necessarily fragmented as well. And these fragments, see, they don't necessarily agree with one another. They each have their own functions, their own opinions, their own priorities, and they come into bitter conflict very often. And in fact, the function of the ego, you could say in a bit of shorthand, is this the creation of a fake unity, of a you know, when you talk about me, my sense of self, it's a kind of, it's a trick of the mind to say, you know what, don't worry about this. Don't worry about the fact that you are broken into that you've broken yourself into a million pieces. This one out of the million, this one's special because this one is you. Okay, so and now everything will you will refer to yourself as that little piece of the whole puzzle, so that you don't have to be overwhelmed and completely distraught of the fact that that you are that you are completely shattered as a self, because that's intolerable, as a matter of fact. Yeah. But of course, the cracks show all over the place in you know, little conflicts or big conflicts with ourselves, and little or big conflicts with people around us, especially with people, but also with situations and things of the like, but especially with people. So the cracks can be seen everywhere in the system. And the ego is there to go like, don't look here, you know, that this is what we think about it. We'll project fault out there, or we'll, you know, go into la la land and start to ruminate and overthink, and that'll pretty much take care of it. And we'll just ignore the entire thing. So when we then come face to face with this fragmentation as we start to meditate, we come to realize that things are badly broken. And once the genie is out of the bottle and that fragmentation is in our face, that lasts for quite a while, we then need to engage in nothing other than practices that will help us reintegrate our nervous system. And it is a nervous system that, and this is a very important part, doesn't necessarily want to be integrated. If you have ever felt the discomfort of true cognitive dissonance, two parts of yourself colliding full on with one another, then you'll know that these things don't want to talk to each other. They, you know, the brokering between them on a logical level is all but impossible, and that the only way to do it is to learn to self-regulate and tap into the discomfort that is engendered by these, and to trace our way back into away from the fruit, definitely, which would be, you know, pleasures, craving and aversion, away from the branches and the leaves, which is all the thinking and emoting, and into the trunk, which leads you to the root and eventually the seed, and that is the pure sense of I am, the one thing that unifies it all. It has no value in and of itself, that I amness, your core sense of self, because it's spurious. But in looking for it, and in orienting your attention not towards the senses and the thinking and the emotions, which is orienting your attention towards fruits and branches and leaves and all the fragmentation out there, in turning your attention around, flipping it inwards onto itself and onto the sense of I am, you essentially start to reintegrate the entire tree of your nervous system and recolonize it, so that you're not living in the branches anymore, but you grab hold of the seed, of the root, like you're grabbing a chicken by the neck, and you go, all right, I got you now, right? And it has, like I said, zero value. But in the words of Nisargadatta, he says, you don't watch the sense of I am because you expect anything from it. you watch it the way you would watch a thief. To the degree that you are on top of it, it won't steal from you, because when that I am is allowed to just run rampant, what it does is it immediately starts to branch out into thought, emotion, sense perception, and the rest of it in a fragmented way. And it hijacks your actual self. Once again, quoting Nisargadatta, he has a beautiful way to explain this, which is to say, the moment you let your imagination run loose, it at once spins out a universe. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because that's exactly what happens. So what you do is you don't let your attention branch out. You revert it onto itself to find the root from where it springs, which is the sense of I am, the core sense of self, which, as I said, is false. Yeah, it's just so familiar. It's such a honeyish, delicious poison that you love your sense of self, right? It is the one thing that appeases you from what is otherwise mind at large, all over the place and fragmented into a billion pieces, which is, as I said, psychologically untenable. It's just your psyche would essentially fall apart if confronted at once with that. So in the process of turning your attention around, you're going to realize that you can't stand what you find, that there is too much emotional distress, because you need to face not only all your memories, but all the visceral inherited responses of every organ and every vertebrae and every visceral self-protective, self-preservation impulse that you've inherited from millions of years of evolution. That's exactly what you're coming across. In fact, this entire turning your attention around to integrate your nervous system is called the path of return. In other words, and this is coming from Gurdjieff, evolution is seen as an entropic thing that keeps branching out and going all over the place, and that in turning your attention around, you're essentially undoing the natural way of creation. So you're going against the grain of nature by doing this. Meditation is not a natural practice. We are not, even though we are returning to our true nature, nature, as in like the natural world, is not in our favor. Otherwise, everybody would do it immediately, and everybody would be enlightened by definition, which we are not, regardless of what they tell you. Oh, you're already there? No, you're not. Yes, you are fundamentally just awareness, but the question is, do you realize it? Has awareness realized that beyond the person is the operative question. So so practices such as breath work, for example, and embodiment, are practices that are meant to tune the nervous system so that it can tolerate these levels of discomfort, tune the nervous system so that attention can be more steadily focused inward and focused towards ever increasing levels of nuance, of perception, of things that are so subtle that you start to lose your bearings in there, so to speak. Hence the value of a teacher at some point, if you're serious about the work. And then you have meditation proper, which is the actual orientation of your attention onto its source. That's all that meditation really comes down to. Once you've practiced enough, focusing on the breath and all these kind of stabilizing, priming practices. As you start to do this, you start to then experience integrative ways of the nervous system to operate. Things that used to be in conflict are no longer in conflict. Compulsions start to subside. Things look a lot brighter, more beautiful, and everything starts to look like a little bit more like a dream, if I had to describe it. But a dream that is very vivid. It's truly difficult to put into words, because it's an experiential thing that is simply a consequence of having done this enough. And there comes a point, and that is, to me, probably the most rewarding point of the path, in which you know that your suspicion that there was magic on offer in this life, and that there was a way to get at it. At some point, that suspicion is confirmed. You are no longer groping around in the dark. You know that your practices are now super effective. You are hitting the bullseye. You're tapping into the non-dual space more and more often, and things become super cool, super exciting, very motivating, very clear. And you also start to humor nonsense a little bit less, in the sense of things that are not truly informative and getting you there. You just don't need anymore, in essence, right? There's no need for beating around the bush with, you know, singing mantras and doing these kind of things. It's just seen as it's a waste of time, really. But not at first. Okay, so this is not to say that you can just skip altogether there. Some people do, but many of us, and I count myself in that camp, require a lot of preparatory work, a lot of theory, and a lot of help to get to that point. So this is the main gist of the video. It is this notion that enlightenment is a psychosomatic endeavor, and that the integration of the nervous system, which otherwise tends to keep branching off into tinier and more discrepant little pieces, is what the main work consists of. I hope you find that informative. I'm very curious to hear your take on the topic. And as usual, if you think that these videos are useful and could be helpful to others, then you're liking, sharing, and subscribing make the channel more available out there, and it's super motivating also to myself. So thanks for listening. I'll be back with more. Cheerio.